Thank you for joining us for Sermons on Demand from Friendship Grace Brethren Church. We provide these videos as a way to share the pulpit messages and teachings offered at Friendship Grace Brethren Church. If you find these videos a helpful resource, please drop us a note at info@friendshipgracebrethren.com. Now open your Bibles and get ready to dig into the Word of God. Okay, it's 9 o'clock. Let's go. Father, thank you for all that you do for us. Thank you for loving us, calling us to be your children, orchestrating everything in the universe to bring us to you. And thank you for that. Thank you for Jesus on the cross. Thank you that he didn't stay on the cross, but came off the cross, went to the grave, out of the grave, and back to you in heaven. Thank you for redemption that we are given because of that. And this morning, as we continue to study and look at ways for us to interact with folks around us and have conversations about who you are and what you've done and about creation and so forth, we trust that you would be honored. Thank you for all that you do for us. Thank you for loving us. We love you in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Guess I ought to get my control going here. Okay, we are in session 5 of Case-Maker's course, and this morning the course, or the session, is about evidence for God. We're in a small section of 3 sessions, evidence for God, and the evidence for God this morning is from the fine-tuning of the universe. And you want to turn on one of those mics so that we make sure we get everybody. That'll work.
Bless you.
Yeah.
Turn on the mics and Elaine gets sneezy.
Mary, did you hear that?
Holy cow.
You already ordered a truck?
Yeah. Now, that would have happened a long time before. So, what do you know about fine-tuning? Somebody tell me what they understand fine-tuning of the universe is.
Well, the odds are phenomenal. You can't even comprehend the odds of, if it wasn't this fine-tuning or it wasn't whatever one thing they happened to be talking about at the time, the odds of life on Earth would be up.
Right. Yeah, things have to be just right. Our distance from the sun, the percentage of oxygen in our atmosphere, and the percentage of other compounds in the atmosphere, the tilt of the Earth. All of these things are fine-tuned such that life does exist. Now, during the video, Jay Warner will make a statement that some of the objections to fine-tuning are the reality that we live in an environment that we live in, and so it looks like it was fine-tuned so we could live in it. Right. That I understand that argument. He'll show us that argument doesn't work, but that's an argument that a lot of people that are arguing against fine-tuning say, well, of course it's that way because you actually are in that environment. So it has to be that way. I don't think that's a great argument, but anyway.
But there's so many things that God has put into this universe that are probably dependent on supporting life, but he didn't create everything just for supporting life.
Right. And the other argument that he'll talk about some today that is very popular today, I don't know if it's because of the various comics that we have and stuff, but the multiverse. Multiverse is a philosophical theory that there are multiple universes. Every one of them is different, and because there are multiple universes, the odds are there has to be one that supports life, which is where we are. There's good reason not to believe multiverse. I think it came from Spider-Man or one of those comic,
Matrix.
one of those comic that turned into movies and lifestyles for some folks.
The Matrix is different. That's an artificial thing.
Yeah.
It's not a
Yeah,
multiverse.
Yeah, multiverse is essentially holding that there's an infinite number of universes, so the odds are one of them has to be exact. There's good reason not to believe that. Anyway,
How many gazillion universes there would have to be to get one.
right. Okay, let's do some, before the video, some questions. The foundational, regional, and locational conditions of our universe, solar system, and planet are
Delicately balanced.
delicately balanced and
Finally calibrated.
finely calibrated. That's a reality. If the tilt of the Earth was just a little bit different, life as we know it wouldn't exist. If the moon were significantly or even a little bit different, life on Earth wouldn't exist.
We talked about God stopping the sun
Right.
from setting
Mhm.
when Joshua needed help in battle, and it just not really understanding all the astronomical and geological stuff,
Mhm.
but it's kind of boggling that it didn't mess up a lot of other things when God did that.
Well,
but God can do that.
Because it's a
Miracle.
miracle. And definition of miracle is something outside of the normal realm of the way God deals with things. And so he performed a significant miracle in multiple, maybe even miracles, in stopping the setting of the sun, as is described in Joshua, because in doing that, he also had to deal with gravitational pull, with centrifugal force, and all sorts of other things. He couldn't just stop the sun or the Earth from rotating, or how he did it, I don't know.
Yeah.
My personal guess is that the Earth didn't stop rotating, that he provided light through the Shekinah glory. But that would be the easiest, but God doesn't need easy.
No.
So
It was just interesting doing this study and
Yeah.
having the two together.
It was,
fine tuning is a great argument. It's very complex, and so it's easy to get bogged down in the fine tuning argument. I love the argument, but it is very easy to get bogged down. The multiverse lacks evidential support. Scientists can't access other universe in the multiverse to corroborate their claims. Worse yet, such explanations fail to logically eliminate the need for
Fine tuning.
fine tuning. Yeah, it still doesn't change it, right? You could have multiple universes. It still doesn't change that one of them has to be exactly right, which takes something. If there's a multiverse generating mechanism, it would certainly have to be calibrated in such a way to make the generation of a life-permitting universe possible. Fine-tuning of the universe implies
Intentionality, purpose.
and purpose, yeah. I'm amazed at the people that are not convinced there had to be a designer. How is it you think that this could be accidental?
Yeah, I think the average person walking around just doesn't think about it.
Right.
And because a lot of the minds that do think about it have figured out that there has to be something, but if they're not believers, they can't quite recognize what it is.
Right.
It's just the DNA alone is
You're right. DNA is fantastically complex.
that. How can they even come close to saying that's just a coincidence?
Right. What we've discovered in observational science is order never comes from disorder. Data, information, never comes from non-information without something intervening. DNA is data. DNA is a long string of data that gives our bodies information about hair color, eye color, height, weight, everything about you, even things that you're allergic to or not allergic to, things that you may like or not like. It's as complex a set of data strings as we can imagine. The computerized DNA takes gigabytes, terabytes, and takes multiple quarks. That's a new term that we're going to be hearing a lot in the future, to comprehend. And yet our bodies just do it automatically. So DNA, I think, is one of the greatest examples of requiring a designer of anything you could ever think of. Okay, now I'm going to warn you, the video today, Jay Warner gets a little, I think, maybe gets a little in his own head. And so some of his explanations are a little convoluted, I think, sometimes. But that's the topic of fine tuning. So, any questions before we get into the video? Okay, let's go.
Okay, now for this session, we're going to continue our discussion of the evidence for God's existence. And remember, we're going to be using that model, that paradigm, as we kind of walk through the evidences for God that we started with in the last session, where we talked about the body in the room and how we're going to take an approach that's an inside or outside the room approach. So we're going to start right where we left off, where we talked about this model, an inside or outside the room model. We're looking at 8 features of the universe and asking the question, can you explain these 8 features by staying in the room of the natural universe? Maybe you can. You only have space-time, matter, physics, and chemistry to do it, and we're just jumping on the highlights of these 8. We're only going to talk about 4. You can find more information about that in God's Crime Scene to get the other 4. But we're going to talk about, we already talked about the beginning of the universe as an evidence for God. Now we're going to talk about a second attribute of the universe, and that is the appearance of fine tuning in the universe. This is a relatively non-controversial notion. Even atheists will say that there's the appearance of fine tuning. Of course, the question is, how do we explain it? Now, I had something similar in a criminal case in which a woman died in her home, upstairs in the bedroom. She died from lack of oxygen because the gas had been left on in the house and there was no pilot light. And because of the overabundance of gas and the lack of oxygen, she and her baby died from lack of oxygen. So the question, of course, was us is to, was this an accident, or was this something that was more nefarious than that? They called us in as the homicide team just because they weren't sure. So we get there and we realize when you examine a case like this, you're examining it in certain layers, let's say. So for example, there are foundational layers we have to examine. What I mean by that is that, hey, it turns out there's a backstory for this woman and her husband. And they had been arguing about custody. They had been arguing about all kinds of things. He had threatened her on several occasions with violence. And sure enough, it turns out that they had he had left her. She was in this house by herself. At one point, they turned off the gas and the electrical, but it turns out right before this occurs, he turned the gas back on, even though he's not living there. And so this is kind of an interesting backstory, right? So there are some foundational elements we have to consider to determine, is this an accident or is something more nefarious going on? He had moved out, left her there, threatened to kill her, and now he's the one who initiates the gas because he's still on the lease. He initiates the gas when, in fact, it had been turned off for some time. Okay, so there's the foundational layer. There's also a kind of a regional layer, I would call, which is that there are some things about the house that are interesting. Her mother discovered her when her mother came over for a visit, discovered she could smell gas from outside. She saw a couple of things. Number one, she had this habit of going into the house through the back door. Often the back window was left open because it had been kind of painted in a position where it was hard to open and close. So she kind of knew that, but sure enough, on this day, instead of being able to reach in through that window to open the door, the window was closed. This was never the case. Southern California, it's pretty mild. The window was always, if not actually open, it was unlocked and you could reach in, but not on this particular day, even though she could already smell gas at the back door. As a matter of fact, all the curtains were drawn. Another thing that her daughter would never usually do. because she loves to have that sunlight in the house. She also saw that, that the car was in the driveway. Usually, she wouldn't park it in the driveway. Some odd things about the house. Even as a matter of fact, when she went into the house, she discovered that there was she finally did get in. Police officers came and she escorted the police in. And then she started pointing these things out to the police officers. She even, for example, noticed that the pocket door at the bottom of the stairs was closed. Never had seen that before. Also, she noticed that her daughter did not throw laundry on the floor, but it turns out the bedroom door was closed and there was laundry stacked up on the outside of the bedroom door. Just some things that are very unlikely. And so this started us thinking, okay, wait a minute, this doesn't seem like it's normal for her daughter. Is there something nefarious going on, right? And of course, you see more of this as you put the layers in. So you can kind of start off with the background story, look at the perimeter of the house as kind of your regional, and then all that stuff I was talking about with the laundry and the pocket door being closed. Not only that, they discovered that the hall heater, which also was adjacent, so it had one opening in the hall, one opening in the master bedroom, old-fashioned house. This wall heater, the pilot had been extinguished, yet the gas was on. And this is Southern California. It's upstairs. This is a heater that, for the most part, was hardly ever used. Yet it happened to be on. So you can kind of, as you dial in close to the bedroom, there's even more suspicious stuff going on. So we ended up initiating this as a homicide investigation. And sure enough, it was. But my point is, how do you assess whether something happened accidentally or there's something intentional? Well, you look at layers, the layers that are foundational, regional, locational, and that's how we assess these kinds of cases. Now, something similar can be said of the universe itself. There's a foundational layer related to the universe at the atomic level. It turns out there's a fine tuning at the atomic level foundationally that allows a universe like ours to emerge in the first place. And you can look at some of the attributes of this fine tuning. For example, the fine tuning of the strong force that binds the nucleus of the atom. It's not just a strong force, it's also what we call the weak force that governs the decay, the radioactive decay. And you also see that there's a fine tuning of the electromagnetic force. So it's strong force, weak force, electromagnetic force, and gravity. These four attributes on the molecular level make it possible for the kind of universe that we live in to emerge to begin with. As a matter of fact, pardon me, you even see that the secondary elements like carbon, for example, require amazingly, incredibly fine-tuned parameters. And so you see that without this foundational layer, just at the subatomic level, you are not going to have the kind of universe we happen to live in. And at the regional level, if you look at the nature of our galaxy, for example, within this universe, you will see that it's just the right shape. Certain shapes do better. Spiral arm galaxies provide for the existence of life in a way that other forms of galaxies do not. It happens to be in the right position. We happen to be in the right position, and so does the galaxy within the context of the universe. It's also the right size. And then even our system within this galaxy, our solar system, our star, for example, happens to be in the right position on one of the arms. And there's reasons why this positioning is right. If you're closer to the gravitational forces within the galaxy, make life, and I've gone through all of these in excruciating detail in God's Crime Scene. But my point is, this fine tuning is relatively non-controversial. People will say, yeah, we do happen to be in the right kind of galaxy. We happen to be in the right position within this galaxy. Our star happens to have the right kind of composition, and we have the right kind of exoplanets, terrestrial planets around this star. This is why, for example, when we look out into the universe, astronomers and scientists find what they think are habitable or potentially habitable planets. Well, what are they looking for? They're looking for stars that have this kind of composition, because they know that these fine-tuned parameters are what make life possible, even the right age of that star and the right mass of that star. Well, it turns out when it comes to our galaxy and our solar system, our star, these parameters are met. And this is why when we're looking around the universe for other signs of potential places where life could emerge, what are we doing? We're looking for these kinds of conditions, because we know that these kinds of conditions are what allow life to emerge. So this is relatively non-controversial. And then at the next level, at the kind of what I would call the locational layer, right? This is right next to the bedroom in the house. Well, here we're talking about right next to where we live, which is our planet. Well, it turns out our planet also has certain attributes, like, for example, the right relationship to the sun, the right distance, the right tilt, the right atmospheric conditions, the right gravitational pull, the right terrestrial crust thickness, the right moon size. All of these things have a role to play in providing the kind of atmosphere, oceans, temperatures, gravitational forces, so that life like ours, carbon-based life, can emerge even here on our planet. So let's go back to our diagram of our crime scene. It turns out that these locational and foundational and regional conditions were such that we said we better initiate an investigation, because this does not look like it's an accident. Well, if you look at the Earth and our life on it, this is our house, right? You can see that there are also similar foundational conditions that have to be just so. And they could be a number of different ways, but they happen to be just so. And then you also have at the regional level a bunch of these conditions that are just so related to our galaxy and to our star. And then at the locational level, you have a number of conditions that are, and by the way, each time that you have a layer of this, it becomes more and more unlikely. In other words, these foundational conditions have an impact on the regional conditions, which have an impact on the locational conditions. So it turns out that small variations at any level destroy the entire process. In other words, if I start tweaking with the conditions at the foundational level, I'll never get the regional conditions to emerge the way they are. And if I start tweaking with the regional conditions, I'll never get the locational conditions the way they are. Let's put it this way. Let's imagine that we're in a ship, a spaceship, and we're about to travel to Earth, or anywhere in the solar system, or anywhere in the galaxy, anywhere in the universe. Well, it turns out that you're going to have to fine-tune the instrumentation. All of these instruments have to be set in just a certain way in order for us to end up at the destination where we want to end up at. And in a similar way, what you see is with the fine tuning of, it's not just what I showed you on that last diagram. These are the conditions in the universe, the cosmological constants that astrophysicists, and I'm only showing part of these, but these are at least the major ones, that astrophysicists and astronomers and scientists believe have to be so finely tuned within a razor's edge in order for us to have life emerge. So in other words, imagine you had to fine tune all those instruments. Well, you have to fine tune the conditions of the universe. And by the way, if just one of those instruments is off by a hair, the whole thing doesn't work. It's not just that these are independent of each other. They have connected results. The connected interaction, if you mess with one, you end up changing the parameters of the other. And so what we do is we have to have all of these conditions just perfectly met so that this ship ends up in a world in which life can emerge. Isn't that wild? Look, this overwhelming fine-tuning in which all of the fine-tuned cosmological constants are even connected it strikes scientists as difficult to describe. This is why someone like Paul Davies, who we'll talk about again in the next session, Paul Davies, who's not a believer, he's agnostic. He basically says, hey, everyone agrees that this appears to be fine-tuned. Now, this does not mean that they think it is fine-tuned, but it looks like it's designed for life. But of course, a lot of people will deny it. Now, the odds here, though, are what people have to overcome. If it's not design, it has to be either random chance, or the constants have to be such. The structure of the laws of nature, let's call them, has to be such that these just ultimately must emerge with this level of precision. So it's either it's required by nature, or that it's just a random chance event. Well, the random chance event seems kind of hard to, and this is one of the illustrations that people will use to show you how difficult this notion is. Just one of the constants is remarkably absurd that anyone would think it could be arrived at by random chance. If you had for example, you just cover this entire continent, the North American continent, you covered them with coins, with quarters or dimes. Okay, put dimes all over the entire continent. Well, you have to stack those dimes up if you wanted to reach to the moon, for example. So now you're stacked dimes all over the continent until you reach to the moon. Now, well, you'd have to take and multiply that by 1 billion times. Okay, imagine now you took that many dimes, 1 billion times more than it required to reach the moon. And you ask somebody to pick out one specific dime. The odds of picking out the one specific dime are listed here, which is about the same level of precision that's required for the strong nuclear force and the expansion rate of the universe. So just that one cosmological constant is this rare, is this unlikely to be arrived at by chance. For example, give you another illustration of this. It's often used by thinkers in this realm. The idea of my giving you a pistol and saying, hey, I want you to hit the bullseye. It's only a 1-inch wide bullseye. Well, it doesn't seem that hard to do. But what if I place the 1-inch wide bullseye on the other side of the observable universe? So I took that 1-inch wide bullseye. The odds of hitting that bullseye are about a 1 in 10 to the 60th chance. That's about the same as the precision required to calibrate the mass density of the universe. So I just want you to kind of get a sense for the kinds of long odds. And scientists have been looking at these long odds for a long time, and they realize they're long odds. So even somebody who's not a believer, somebody who's agnostic or atheist, will look at this like Michio Kaku and say, hey, you know what? It's shocking to find how many of the familiar constants of the universe lie within a very narrow band that makes life possible. If a single one of these accidents were, he's calling it an accident. See what he just said? These are all accidents because that's how the only way you can arrive there from a naturalistic perspective. But if a single one of these quote unquote accidents was altered, stars would never form. The universe would fly apart. DNA would not exist. Life as we know it would be impossible. Earth would flip over or freeze and so on. Well, that's just the truth of it. These are so fine-tuned that you're going to have a hard time explaining you aren't going to get to any form of life if these constants are not met, and they have to be accidents according to this worldview. Let me give you another idea of how you can illustrate this. Let's say, for example, this seems to me to be unreasonable. I think that if you're really reasonable about this, you will infer the existence of a designer, or at least that there's something that's not reasonable about explaining it with just space-time matter, physics, and chemistry. So, for example, if we went out and we were at a local casino and you're playing a game of poker and you get dealt your hand and everybody else gets dealt their hand as well. And then the dealer deals his own hand. And you look at your hand and you go, oh, I got a good hand. That's a good hand. So you bet the house on it, right? You bet everything on it, right? And then sure enough, he turns over his cards and he's got a royal flush. Oh, my goodness. Well, it happens. I mean, it's not likely to happen. The odds of dealing a royal flush are this actual number. But you're like, okay, so you have a little more money, so you go ahead and you decide to take another hand. So he deals you another hand, and now that your second hand is even better than your first. You got a straight flush. Oh my, this is awesome. But of course, he turns over his hand and he's got another royal flush. Is that odd? I mean, that's really highly improbable, right? That he would deal himself 2 royal flushes in a row. Are you going to sit there much longer? Are you going to think, wait a minute? I think right now, just 2 in a row, you're going to say, no, this is fishy. This is not a matter of just chance. You're cheating. Well, what if you're stubborn? No, okay. Maybe it's, so you, what if this guy, the dealer, dealt 3 in a row? Would you sit there much longer? I don't think you would sit there much longer. By the way, already you are at the rate of what is required to calibrate the strength of gravity. Well, let's see. How much is that? Well, you're not there yet, but imagine. Okay, so here's the question. You're sitting at the table. You've already took 3 in a row. You're not yet at what's required to calibrate the strength of gravity. Would you like to know what that is? How much longer would you sit at this table and allow this guy to deal himself straight royal flushes before you'd say no? Well, okay, so how many royal flushes is the strength of gravity? That would be 6 in a row. Okay. Are you willing to sit there and take 6 in a row without complaining? Yeah, it's just chance. It's just chance. I can use that. It's chance or necessity that actually, no, there's nothing about the texture of the cards or that necessitates him getting 6 in a row. And the odds of this happening are like, this is the same odd. Let me show you this. How many royal flushes in a row would get you to the calibration of quarks, the masses that are associated with the particles of the nucleus? Okay, so you'd have to have 12 royal flushes in a row. I do not think you would sit there and let yourself be, you would say something's fixed. Well, how about the precision required to calibrate the energy density of space? That's a much higher number. These are just single cosmological constants. Well, how many would you need in a row for that? For that one constant, okay? Think about it. You would need 28 royal flushes in a row. Now, let me just ask you this question. Are you going to sit there really and think after 28 in a row, this isn't rigged? Not believing God fine-tuned the universe is like allowing the dealer to deal himself 28 royal flushes in a row and never opening your mouth. You're going to complain because you know that's rigged. Now, look, the only way to explain the fine-tuning in the universe is either through chance, like we just talked about. The other way, though, to describe it is through physical necessity. Now, there's a third way. The third way is through the multiverse theories that are offered. So I just want to cover a couple of these. By the way, 2 of these can be, these two, chance or necessity, are really asking you to think inside the box. Right? You can get these by staying inside the room of the natural universe, inside or outside. Well, you can stay inside for these 2. It could just be chance that occurs inside space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry. It could just be there's something about physics and chemistry that necessitate these kinds of things. So that's why you're stuck with these constants. You're still staying inside the room. Now, it turns out the multiverse theory says there's a number, really an infinite number of universes outside the realm of our universe. So now you're outside the room for that explanation. All right, but it's not a God explanation. It's an outside the room explanation that involves some set of natural processes that we would call the multiverse. Okay, I just want to quickly go through a couple of these with you. Okay, so the fine tuning could fine tuning explain the chance? Well, look, first of all, chance is not an explanation. It's not. When someone says it's just a matter of chance, what they're really saying is, I don't know what led to this, but you give it enough time, it could just happen somehow by chance. Okay, well, can you imagine going to our death scene, right? And I just walk in and say, I'm looking at all these things, the fact that, all these elements, the house has been modified in some way, the pocket door is closed, the clothes are stacked against the crack at the bottom of the door, the pilot light is out, he just turned the pilot light back on, everything's closed up, so now that she die up in the upper room. Really? I could just say it's just a coincidence. It's all just a coincidence. But would you be comfortable with me as a detective walking in and seeing all that and saying, there's nothing to see here. Pay no attention to these details. Well, this is what Paul Davies says. How much chance can we buy in scientific explanations, right? Now, he's got a book called The Goldilocks Enigma. He says one measure of what is involved can be given in terms of coin flipping. Odds of 10 to the 120th to 1 is like getting heads no fewer than 400 times in a row. If the existence of life in the universe is completely independent of the big fixed mechanism, if it's just a coincidence, then those are the odds against our being here. That level of flukiness seems too much to swallow. Yeah, no kidding. Well, okay, how about this then? Maybe it's just a result of physical necessity, right? In other words, all of these elements could you imagine if I walked in here and I said, oh, really? Now, I think the reason why this is worth investigating is because we would look at those conditions and say, well, all of this, could have been different, right? So this is why it seems suspicious to us. Now let's go to the universe for a second. Could all of this have been different? Because if so, well, it turns out this is what Paul Davies says. He says there's not a shred of evidence that the universe is logically necessary. In other words, this idea that this is the only way our universe could be based on the laws of gravity, physics, the laws of chemistry, given playing on space, time, and matter. Well, that's not actually the case. There's not a shred of evidence that this is all logically necessary. Indeed, as a theoretical physicist, which is what Paul Davies is, I find it rather easy to imagine alternative universes that are also logically consistent and therefore are equal contenders of reality. So the reason why this is important for us to look at is because this could have been different. The universe could have been different, just like our house could have been different. Now let's go to one kind of subset of this. I see this been said a number of times. Is it just that we're seeing fine tuning because we happen to live in the universe in which we exist? In other words, is it just a phenomenon? We observe fine tuning because it's tuned in such a way that we exist in this universe so that we can observe it. So then we observe the universe and we go, oh, in other words, Lawrence Krauss, who used to be at Arizona State University, he's no longer there for other reasons we won't get into, but this is what he says in one of his books. He says, in A Universe from Nothing, he says, to put it another way, it's not too surprising to find that we live in a universe in which we can live. Okay. So you see what he's saying? He's saying, well, yeah, why would you think this is anything special? Things just happen to be this way. You emerge, you look at them and you go, oh, look, they happen to be this way. Doesn't seem all that striking to him. Okay, let's go back to our death scene for a second. Could you imagine if I walked up to this scene as a detective and I said, you know, put it another way, it's not too surprising to find a dead body in a house in which there exists a dead body. Can you imagine me saying this? We shouldn't be surprised to find dead bodies, right, in a house with the windows and doors suspiciously closed and the vents and gas lines found as they were. If the conditions weren't like this, no one would have died and we wouldn't have been called to the scene. Okay, this is ludicrous. Do you see that it's ludicrous? Look, we have to be careful as detectives to make a distinction, right? We cannot confuse observations like a dead body in a house with explanations for why there's a dead body in the house. These are two different things. This is also true of science, though. Scientists have to be careful not to confuse observations, like the fact that there's life in the universe, with the explanations for why the universe contains life. Let me go to one last thing here. It's possible that we could jump out of the box because you can't explain it with chance. You can't explain it with necessity. But maybe I can jump out of the box and explain it with the multiverse. Mikio Kaku puts it this way in Parallel Worlds. In this multiverse of universes, most universes are dead. The proton's not stable. Atoms never condense. DNA never forms. The universe collapses prematurely or freezes almost immediately. But in our universe, a series of cosmic accidents, there he is, and that accident word again, has happened. Not necessarily because of the hand of God, but because of the law of averages. In other words, if I have enough universes, odds are better. If I have an infinite number of universes, well, then of course, I'm going to have one that looks like ours by accident. How does that even? Here's the theory, basically. The idea is that at the quantum level, at the small quantum level, things pop into existence. And so, these little bubble universes could just pop into existence. We can't explain sometimes why things pop into existence at the quantum level. So isn't it possible that a universe could pop into existence and then you wouldn't even expect these universes to intersect with each other, because if the environment is expanding, like the pot and the boiling water, each bubble is a universe. But if the pot is expanding, well, then you're not even going to see a connection between the bubbles. They'll never even, because there's the space between the bubbles is expanding. What's the evidence for any of this, by the way? There's the biggest problem. The controversy within science about multiverse theory is dramatic because it lacks the kind of evidence scientists typically use to formulate theories. As a matter of fact, Paul Davies puts it this way: prominent scientists and commentators have used words such as fantasy, virus, and intellectually bankrupt on their denunciations. For those theoretical physicists hard at work trying to formulate a unique final theory, the multiverse comes across as a cheap way out. Randomness plus observer selection strikes many physicists as an ugly and impoverished explanation compared to an overarching mathematical theory that pins down the properties of the world with quantitative precision and interweaves them into harmonious unity. So we're back to here's our boiling pot of water. How many universes there then are there in the universe? How many in the multiverse? Why would we limit this number? We wouldn't limit this. There'd be an infinite number. There's nothing about the theory or the mathematics that would say there's a limited number. Yeah, there's only 572 universes in the multiverse. No, there's an infinite number. And this presents us with an absurdity. So, for example, if just 0.00000, I'll just give you the number, 1% of the universes are just like ours, well, then the question is, how many universes would be just like ours? Well, any small percentage of an infinite number gives you another infinite. This means that if this theory is true, there are an infinite number of universes just like ours, with the guy named J. Warner Wallace doing a video right now about the multiverse. Everything's just like us. But that also means that there's also an infinite number of universes in which there's a guy named J. Warner Wallace who's doing this video, but he's wearing a different colored shirt. And this has been observed by physicists like Alan Guth, who say, well, look, if multiverse theory is true, well, then there is a universe where Elvis is still alive. Yeah, that's right. And there's a universe where Elvis is still alive, but he wasn't born in Memphis. He was born in Nashville. And it's small changes. You get the idea that this is the problem with multiverse theory. So let's go back and close it this way. So here's our box. We got to explain it some way, right? So either if we stay in the box to explain the fine tuning of the universe, we're going to say it's chance or necessity. The problem, of course, is that chance ignores the long odds. And the problem with necessity is that it first of all, it ignores the interconnectedness of everything, and it's not supported by any evidence. There's lots of physicists who have observed that they can imagine different scenarios for the cosmological constants. That's why Kaku says, hey, there could be a number of universes that freeze immediately because the physics are slightly different. Now, the other way, of course, is to suggest there's a multiverse pot of infinite number of universes. But first of all, to say that, you're already stepping outside the realm of the natural universe in which we live. You're looking now for a cause that's outside the room. You've already conceded an external cause. But remember, we're looking for a cause of the universe that cannot include the aspect. Science tells us that everything in our universe begins with our universe. And that means that all space, time, and matter begin in our universe. But here you're suggesting that there's something outside. But here's the problem. It cannot be spatial, material, or temporal, right? And even if there was a multiverse generator of some nature, some environment, well, I'm stealing space in order to call it an environment. But the point is, it would still require a level of fine tuning so that it could also create an infinite number of universes. And Richard Swinburne has done a good job of kind of talking about this. Here's what he says. Any proposed multiverse mechanism needs to have a certain form rather than innumerable possible other forms, because there could be a number of different ways that the multiverse generator could be constructed physically or by way of its own constants. And probably constants are needed in that thing also, that generator of multiverse, of universes that need to be fine-tuned in a narrow sense. Do you see what you just done? You just kicked the fine-tuning problem down one level to the multiverse generator. And that's why this explanation outside the room, which you're already conceding, I got to go outside the room. I can't do it with just chance. I can't do it with just necessity. So I'm outside the room, but it turns out your multiverse theory doesn't work outside the room. A better explanation is that there is a powerful, purposeful, goal-oriented, non-spatial, non-temporal, non-material cause that is responsible. He's a fine-tuner responsible for the fine-tuning. So let me just close by saying that So there's the problem. You happen to have a better explanation than the multiverse generator, which also requires its own fine tuning that you're going to have to explain. The better explanation is just you have a fine tuner that does what we know God does. He fine tunes. And then, of course, when you have a universe that's been fine tuned, you look at it and you say, oh, yeah, I see fine tuning. So we've looked at two aspects of the universe, the origin of the universe, the fine tuning of the universe. We're going to turn a corner and go to biology in the next session. But what we're trying to do here is to give you enough to think about so that you can respond to people who are going to object to our larger strategy, our larger claim, which is going to be the gospel. But if there's no God, there's no Christian God. So that's why we're taking the time here. See you next session.
Makes my head hurt.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah, it is. It is. This is perhaps the most complex of the sessions, just because of the topic. It's hard to go through this without. So, in just a
You learn
couple.
all that stuff in detective school?
No. No, matter of fact, I didn't get any exposure to any of this until I had to do all the philosophy classes for my PhD. That's where I got introduced to all of this. And I read it all the time, and I'll have to read some of these things 3 or 4 times to get the gist of what they're trying to say. So all of these conditions have to be
Just
fine-tuned so that the ship ends up in the world where life can emerge. It's true. I mean, our world has to be like our world is in order for our world to exist. This overwhelming fine-tuning in which all of the fine-tuned cosmological constants are even connected strikes scientists as difficult to describe. It is impossible to describe it without a designer. The only way to explain fine-tuning is either through random chance. It's not an explanation. What they're really saying is, I don't know. By the way, the idea of random chance, and now that we have supercomputers that do more computing, is one of the reasons that science is pushing the age of the universe out further, is because they're discovering that it's going to take many more years than they thought they had in order to get the potential chance to happen.
And conversely, it gives creationists the ammunition to say that it's almost or impossible for those things to happen.
Yeah, like the 28 royal flushes in a row. The dealer deals 1 royal flush, I'm already suspicious. He deals 2 or 3, forget it, we're done.
Yeah.
Not 28.
That really blows out the Big Bang.
No, well, the Big Bang has right. The timing of it is what's the problem. I'm not against saying the Big Bang, because as he said last week, a Big Bang requires what? Big Banger. Requires somebody to do it, because you don't have nothing, something. Something had to, a timeless, spatialist, temporalist being had to do that. That's the uncaused first cause. Necessity, but the universe could have been different. There is no evidence for this. This is confusing observations with explanations. Blank. The controversy in science about this theory is dramatic because it lacks the kind of evidence scientists typically use to formulate theories. What theory is this? Multiverse. It would still require a level of fine-tuning.
Some of these, it was hard to figure out what.
Yeah, I had to go back several times in the video to get that too. Yeah, the multiverse is not an answer to the fine-tuning question, because it still in itself requires fine-tuning. A fine-tuner, a powerful, purposeful, goal-oriented, non-spatial, atemporal, non-material cause that is responsible for the fine-tuning. That's God,
Yep.
right?
I put God, designer, fine tuner, and cause first cause.
Yeah.
Any of those would work.
Yeah. Now, most of the guys that say that there needs to be a fine tuner are not necessarily Christians. They may be deists, maybe even theists, but they are admitting, and even people like Richard Dawkins are now saying it's pretty hard to get away with not having a designer. Which, that doesn't make him a Christian. I hope someday he is, but that doesn't make him a Christian. He's absolutely having to admit, I can't articulate where we came from other than somebody did it. I mean, 28 royal flushes in a row, that's going to kind of cause you to say, yeah, somebody had to do it.
And if it's a dealer, it's suspicious if there's even one.
Right. So picture yourself with this is your assignment for the week. Picture yourself with an unbelieving friend. She does not want anything to do with the Bible. Reflecting on these last several sessions, how would you handle an intentional conversation with her concerning God? What conversation starters would you use? With the knowledge you now possess, brainstorm several topics, questions, and arguments. How would you have the conversation? Because now you have a little bit more ammunition to have the conversation that, even if you're just having the conversation about there's an uncaused first cause, eventually get to the point where that uncaused first cause is a personal being called God. Just getting some people to admit that there's an uncaused first cause is a big deal. If they're honest with themselves, they have to agree that there is. It's pretty hard to have what we have in the universe without, but some people try to make that argument.
Yeah. Say, look around you. How can you believe this is all an accident?
Yeah, the logic of it is so remarkable. I appreciated the way he revealed the odds. And quite frankly, that's why we're where we're at today. Is the world the Christian world has given up this territory and stopped making the argument, and so now they're making other things, other ways to argue for why we exist.
None of them work as well as God.
No, and that's one of the things that Frank Turk says all the time. When you're going through this, what is the most logical? Maybe not the one that can't be believed without a shadow of a doubt, but what's the most logical conclusion you can reach? Is there's an uncaused first cause. Is it possible that we have a multiverse? Probably not, but that probably means that yes, there is, and so the odds continue to get bigger, and as time goes on and as our computing power gets greater, the length of time will have to be even greater, because they're finding that they can't make the leap in those short times. And so it's going to take, instead of 28 royal flushes in a row, it's going to take 280 or something. That's the problem. And so our timeline keeps getting stretched. Questions, comments?
I like the example in the book, and it covers, I think, what we talked about last week about, showed all these dominoes rolled lined up, but there has to be an initiator person to press the first domino.
Yeah, and there has to be something that made the dominoes, and that made the reality that dominoes could exist. Right. If there was nothing, then it couldn't become something, because it requires something to make something out of nothing. Yeah. That's the hardest thing, and science has accepted that. Yeah, it's reality. Nothing doesn't. Thank you for watching or listening to this teaching on demand from Friendship Grace Brethren Church. Please consider sending us an email at info@friendshipgracebrethren.com to let us know how this teaching may have helped you. Please also consider joining us in person at Friendship Grace Brethren Church, located at 10251 Metro Parkway, Suite 116, Fort Myers, Florida, just south of the intersection of Metro and Colonial Boulevard. Sunday school begins at 9 and worship service at 10 a.m. We look forward to seeing you in person at Friendship Grace Brethren Church.